Hello and welcome to the Alpine Valley School podcast. I'm your host, Miss Gallivan, a former AVS student, a graduate, and a current staff member at the school. Our theme for today's show is storytelling and the power that stories have in our lives. Jean-Luc Godard said, "Sometimes reality is too complex. Stories give it form." I personally have always loved telling stories. I like to engage an audience, make people laugh, really see someone getting into what you're telling them and what you're sharing. And I also think that I found out about myself by telling stories. I still do. At school, storytelling is a constant theme. It doesn't always look like sitting down and writing a novel, which I think is how maybe most people think of storytelling, but it comes up a lot. And in fact, it does involve writing in many cases. There's been a long-standing writing group at Alpine Valley School that many remember with great fondness, myself included. What I'm thinking of that beyond that is actually role-playing. Role-playing is something that is big at school, especially right now, but also in the past, whether it's through a kind of structured game like Dungeons and Dragons, for example, although there are many others, or more freeform. We see students taking their own approach to world building through the asteroid game, which we've talked about on the show, through other games that are more freeform, that are more organic, where kids come up with the rules themselves. Storytelling is huge in those games, and kids have the ultimate control over it. We also see storytelling coming out in Minecraft, in communal games that are taking place online, and in how kids relate to each other while they're playing those games, and in creating art, in the story of a project, or something that they draw a picture of that's a character that they relate to, or that has some powerful meaning. We also see storytelling in communication, in meetings, in trying to bring people over to your side when you are making a case for something. For example, if someone wants to change a law, storytelling can come up a lot in that scenario, dreaming about what might happen if we changed this law, if telling a story of a future student who might encounter this law and be stymied, and we should stand up for that future student by making this change. So it's big in communication, in meetings, in how we kind of deal with life every day. And so students are exposed to these different ways of storytelling on a constant basis. Stories allow all of us, but kids in particular, to try on new roles and personas. In a role-playing game, the kid who is more quiet and withdrawn might get the chance to be the leader and decide what everybody does. It also, as I mentioned earlier, is a way for kids to self-organize. So creating these role-playing games where they have the ultimate authority and there are no adults saying, here's what you should do, and you need to make sure you include everybody and everyone has to have a role. And even though those things are very well-intentioned, they are interfering. And usually these games are free from interference. And in fact, when adults like me or someone else join the game, we have to adhere to the kids' rules in order to play. And we might suggest some changes if we decide that they are totalitarian in nature, for example, but it's ultimately not up to us. And I think that's a very good thing. Another thing that storytelling does is allow us to mimic frightening experiences and how we'll deal with them in total safety. So telling stories of battling dragons or the police fighting bad guys. Mimic scenarios that in real life would be terrifying, but give us a chance as people to decide how we might want to handle that scenario. And like I said before about trying on different roles, you get to play the bad guy, you get to play the good guy, and you get to kind of find out your feelings and your place in those universes, which can be very valuable. It also allows children to experience conflict in a safe way. So if you are on opposite sides of the battle in an asteroid game, your city might get destroyed that you spent hours working on, and you might be ticked off at the other person for blowing it up, but it's still within the confine of a game. So there's no necessarily animosity towards the other person because you both knew what you were signing up for by playing this game, but you get to experience those emotions and those charged situations and still walk away from it being friends, which again is a valuable experience in what we deal with as adults in real life. So why does any of this matter? Why did the hours spent drawing and writing and playing actually mean anything? And I think it matters because communication is vital in adult life, whether it's in a relationship or at work or just in people out in the world. We need to know how to talk to each other. And storytelling is a very powerful way of communicating. I'm going to link to an article in the show notes that's called "Storytelling Should Be the #1 Skill You Want to Improve." It's a skill that a lot of people in their adult lives are trying to learn, trying to master. And kids at our school get so much practice at doing that. As with pretty much the whole theme of the podcast, what looks like play is really learning. Play is how kids learn. I'm sure you're sick of hearing that by now, but it's still true. And the way that they organize their games, their experiences, teaches incredibly valuable lessons, even though it doesn't necessarily look like it at the time. To help illustrate this case, my guest today is Bronwen Abbatista. She is a former AVS student, a graduate. She works as a designer in San Francisco, and she is a very accomplished storyteller, one of the original writing class members, along with myself and several others. And we had a conversation about what it meant to her to be exposed to so many opportunities for storytelling and how it helped her communicate and shaped kind of how she was going to spend the rest of her life. So I think we had a great talk, and I look forward to sharing it with you. Here's our conversation. Hi, Bronwen. Welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks for having me.
My pleasure. Would you start by making an introduction?
Absolutely. So I'm Bronwen Abbatista, and I currently live in Oakland. Soon we'll live in San Francisco and work in San Francisco as a designer at a software consultancy called Pivotal Labs.
Great. And when did you start at AVS? Do you remember?
I enrolled at AVS in 2000 when I was 12 years old, and I graduated in 2005.
Wow, so you were 12 when you started. Where had you been going to school before that?
Before that, I had been in public school for my entire previous career. For middle school, I went to the Magnet Middle School in Denver, where I grew up. It was called Place Middle School. And that was, a very conventional experience that didn't work out super well for me. I was in the gifted and talented program there, and we were segregated from the general population. It actually did look like a jail, and we called it Place Penitentiary. It was not a great scene. So there was bullying, and I transferred out of there in 7th grade to go to Denver School of the Arts. I got into both creative writing and the visual design programs. It was also a public school, part of the Denver public school system. I chose to go into the creative writing program. And while I loved my major, I loved my creative writing classes, the rest of the curriculum was, again, pretty conventional public school curriculum. And there was a weird dynamic where a lot of the kids didn't try as hard. And if you were in performance majors, you sort of got off easy. Creative writing didn't happen to be a performance major. So a lot of double standards. And while I continued to perform well, I always got straight A's. It was a corrosive experience for me. And my mom saw that I wasn't very happy in the situation. And so she sought out alternatives outside the public school system. So around that time, a friend told her about Sudbury, and she got a copy of Free at Last. So we both read it, and I remember just reading that book and immediately knowing that this was the place for me. And that was the summer of 2000 when I read the book, and I remember there was still some of the summer left, and I was just. So then we did the initial meeting at AVS. It was at the old building, actually. And I remember after we decided that I was going to start and there was still some summer left, that I was just so eager for the school year to begin.
That's a nice feeling.
Yeah.
So what differences did you notice within yourself after you started at AVS?
So I feel like there's a common pattern where people take a while to acclimate to the freedom of a Sudbury environment, especially if they've come from somewhere more regimented. And, maybe they look to the staff members to give them homework, or they really struggle with boredom. I feel like for myself, I transitioned pretty quickly. I've always liked to keep busy and have a lot of different things that I'm doing, a lot of different pursuits, but I definitely didn't miss the homework. Like, that was one of my least favorite things about public school.
Yeah, we don't get that a lot, where people come in and are like, oh, darn, where's all the homework?
Yeah, right. And early on, I mostly hung out with people and played games. One of my really early memories was playing pool with Tyler and Hannah and just kind of marveling at I'm doing this during the school day, and it's awesome. Yeah, but I felt like I acclimated to it pretty quickly, and also started either setting up classes or participating in classes that were being set up. I think also relatively early on, Missa, you set up the Japanese class, and that had always been something I was interested in. So I got involved in that right away.
Awesome. And so tell me about some of the creative pursuits you were involved in at school. What did you do to kind of feed that creative energy?
There were a lot. I was thinking about this list, and I just did a lot of different things. The top of the list is the writing class, which I think spanned almost my entire career at AVS. That was such a big part of my experience. We met pretty regularly, every week. And I think there were about, varied in size, but maybe about 4 to 6 of us. And not everyone would have something to share every week, but whoever did would usually print out what they were going to read or what they wanted feedback on, and give it to the other participants as early as possible. I remember for me, it was often the morning of, and I was like, I hope you have time to read this. And then we would usually read almost the entire thing that we submitted, even if it was several pages. It was super long, we would truncate it a little bit. And then we go around and give feedback. The culmination of that for me really was when I decided to put together the Muse, which was a kind of an anthology of things that not just writing class students, but any other students from the school who wanted to participate had written. And this was inspired by the chapbook that we did at Denver School of the Arts called Calling on Calliope. So I wanted to do like my own spin on that. And it was not just written pieces, which could be anything from, prose to poetry. It was also illustrations. And I really enjoyed the whole process of curating the volumes and learning Quark Express with Deborah Alford, going to the printer with Martha, and we got a whole bunch of copies printed up. And I think, as I recall, people bought them for like $15 or $5 or something.
I remember that.
So that was great, and it really felt like it was, something that I had brought into being. But other things I did were I was always like lettering, or I really loved the Japanese kanji, and I did sumie painting for a while, like made scrolls, worked in the metalsmithing lab when like Deborah and Kayla got that set up. But I remember that was relatively short-lived because I had all of these grand ideas, and I saw what was coming out of there, and some of the incredible craftsmanship that like Deborah had made, and Kayla was getting super into it. And then it took me like a week to make one tiny silver ring, and still like I wasn't able to polish all the scratches out of it. And I was like, no, I can't do this. It's too hard.
Maybe a little too detail oriented, maybe.
I mean, like I'm pretty detail oriented, but for some reason that didn't jive.
Yeah, I never even went in there because they had soldering irons and there was open flame, and I was like, oh, this is a bad idea. I'll just watch.
Yeah. I remember a few afternoons of plein air painting with Martha. We got our easels set up, and I was feeling kind of intimidated. She was doing this like beautiful kind of impressionistic landscape of the trees that were across from the school, and I was like kind of intimidated by that. So I remember like just painting bricks and like trying to get the light and the color right. Cooking for a fundraiser for the Japanese class. I mean, our sensei, Kathy, was an amazing chef. I think she had like been certified by some fancy chef school or something. And so she taught us, and we made like the most gourmet pizzas of all time, and raised enough money to go to Domo, a restaurant in Denver that was like a very traditional Japanese style restaurant. And then also the year that Molly, my younger sister, was there, we love to cook together, and she's also an amazing cook. So we would like plan these very detailed, intricate like meal plans, and we do huge grocery shops over the weekend and get like fancy ingredients, and then it would take us like 2 hours to make lunch and another 2 hours to clean up, but it was still very satisfying. I also think of gymnastics as a creative pursuit, and the role-playing games that I was involved in as well, because in finding ways to keep my hands busy, I remember making this like sprawling map of this huge dungeon that we were exploring, and it was on graph paper, and we'd be like going through a hallway, and Jesse was running our campaign, and so he would have the map printed, but he couldn't show it to us because it had all the monsters on it. So I'd be like, is that hallway 7 squares or 8?
Yeah, I remember that.
I think the rest of you would be like bored, being like, can we just like fight the monster already? But he and I would be like heads bent over the math and like deciding how to crosshatch it and everything.
That's funny. Well, what I remember about those maps is just how stunningly gorgeous they were. Like when you were done, they were like this, like I wanted to frame them and keep them forever because like they were just little, like I'm sure people are imagining just like you draw some squares, but like you did them like the old like ancient maps of the sea with like illustrated
the RP
monsters
dragons.
and like funny little notes about where things happened, and they
That's
ended up
right.
being like this very visual representation of the adventure that I just treasured.
Oh man, that's such a good insight. Because like I think I've carried through that like desire to make my experiences visual kind of like through my whole life, and like it's a big part of what I do now, as a designer. So that's interesting.
Yeah. So you work as a designer now. Is that one of the ways that you think that being so involved in the arts has affected you, or like what are some of those other ways that you kind of can look at your life now in hindsight and see, oh, I did these things at school, or these are some of the things I wanted to do, and how you're using that in your life, your real life, your adult life.
Oh my gosh. I mean, there's so many ways, and it's nuanced. One thing that I'm very grateful to Alpine Valley for is the freedom to pursue all of these different expressions, because while I mentioned that, I really liked my creative writing classes at Denver School of the Arts and I had a fantastic teacher, but I couldn't just stick to writing. And like, I'm glad that I didn't, and that I think in what I'm doing now have found ways to kind of bring together some of these different areas where like, it's important to be able to think visually and communicate visually, but also like, to communicate really well through writing, and be able to interface with people. So I think it's helped me professionally. I think personally, like I remember some of, I don't know, just like there were many great times at school, but some of the best times were finding an art project that I could just lose myself in for hours. Like obscurely, I remember there were a few days where so I used to drink the Tazo tea, and I really liked the design, like the product design of the bottles. And under the cap, there would be this like symbol that you could just imagine like a rune or something. Like, didn't really mean anything, but I really liked the aesthetic of it. And so I got out my sketchbook and like drew the symbol really big. And then I just had fun like filling in the symbol with colored pencils and trying to make like a smooth color gradient. It was like, for no reason, but I could just do that for hours. And I would look up and be like, it's 5 and I started at 1. And I think knowing that about myself, that like this is a flow state for me, has been really valuable, because what AVS teaches us about pursuing our passions, that is such good advice for life when when you get out there and you're trying to decide like, what can I do sustainably that makes me happy and is also a way that I can support myself.
Yeah. And, you could spend hours doing that in graphic design school, or you can do it at AVS and save some money.
Mm-hmm. And know about it earlier on in life, right? I mean, I think that like college these days can sometimes act as like an extension of high school, or people like need more time to explore different disciplines and figure out what they actually want to do, because when they're in like the high school curriculum, they're just sort of being shunted from required class, and not given the time and space to get them to know themselves well enough to even know what they want to do.
Yeah, absolutely. So as a writer, as someone who is involved in, role-playing games and storytelling, what are your thoughts about the power of storytelling, about how it shapes us as people?
Mm-hmm. So the way I think about storytelling is as a huge catalyst for change and for communication and moving things forward through engaging people. And I think that's true as much today for us as humans as it was even before language was developed. Um, I think that in many ways our brains have developed at a slower pace than the technology that's speeding around us. And we still instinctively respond to all this content by looking for the story to make sense of the experience. And uh, I was struck by this, what Tahir Shah says in Writes in Arabian Nights, stories are a communal currency of humanity. Mm. I think that's, really, really true across ages and disciplines.
Yeah. So how do you think that you're communicating through stories and doing so often and in such an intentional way kind of affected you in your young life?
In relation to AVS or just generally? So obviously, being in a school where there's mixed age groups, you're not kind of isolated in classrooms. Communication is a big piece of the puzzle, and a very important skill to learn early on. And I think that being a good communicator requires some degree of empathy. And so developing that has definitely helped me, now when I'm working with coworkers and also understanding better the user that I'm designing for, like having empathy for a wide variety of people. But at AVS, I think, even before I was a student there, and just that I've always been pretty sensitive about communication and thought a lot about how I present myself. At AVS, I was school meeting secretary for a few years. And I remember sitting through many school meetings. And since I was taking notes, I had to pay pretty close attention. And I would think, boy, these meetings could be half as long if people would just stop repeating in their own words what someone else just said. And that's not even to mention the times that Bruce and Janet would go off on some tangent and you'd know it was going to be another one of those 4-hour school meetings. So that experience taught me to listen deeply to what other people are trying to communicate and ask myself if what I thought to share would shed new light on the discussion or be repetitive and kind of cause churn.
Yeah, that's a great observation. So tell me a little bit more about what you're doing these days. You said that you're a designer, you're in San Francisco. Tell me a little bit more about what your work and your personal life look like.
Sure. So I moved to San Francisco from Denver to pursue and grow my career in software design. I initially went through a immersive user experience design program. And so user experience is kind of jargony, but I like to think of it as it's about improving the customer's experience of a product. So like I said, it involves a lot of empathy and really getting to understand the mindset of the people you're designing for, as well as having a firm grasp of the technical aspects of design. And after that program, I contracted for a while and also worked at several design agencies. Then just previous to my current position, I was the senior product designer for a company called Cherish, which is it's a buy and sell marketplace for vintage furniture. It's like the chair that you sit in, ISH. So you can look it up.
Yeah. Play on words. I get it.
Very clever. So that was a fun place to work, but more sort of, I would say, business driven than design minded and like less human centric. And I'd been aware for many years, mainly through our good friend Jesse Alford, of Pivotal and Pivotal Labs. And it's a company that I'd wanted to work for a long time. So I now work as a designer on Pivotal Labs, and our goal is to we say to help people build better software, but that is really done through a lot of teaching and enablement around like a process that involves a lot of collaboration. So that communication piece comes in really handy. Mm-hmm. We bring clients on site and work with a lot of big names like GE, Home Depot, Albertsons. We have lots of government projects, so can be pretty high level stuff. But what we're actually doing day to day really comes down to like communicating clearly, working well together as a team, and as a designer in this process, it's my role to like advocate for who the user is and how can we make the experience better for them. And yeah, so I've been here for a couple months now and really enjoy it. Really feel like this is a good fit for me, that it is kind of that I guess meeting point of a lot of my strengths, and also like pushes me to grow. And outside of that, I live with my husband Garrett, and we've lived in Oakland and are planning to move into San Francisco. We found this like killer apartment in the Mission District, so I'm pretty stoked. It's gonna, I think, be a really good change.
Yeah. Well, good. Good for you. So to wrap up, my infamous question about a favorite memory of AVS.
There are so many to choose from. It's always hard.
I know.
But I chose the one that I feel is truly iconic of a lot of what I love about AVS, and will always be so close to my heart. There were many days like this, but I remember one day in particular, the little kids had been, they really wanted me to take them to Prospect Park. And I think it was a kind of like early autumn day, and there were, I think I maybe had I had a whole parcel of them. I had like 8 little kids or something. I remember Duncan and Anna Suter being there. And so we were like walking along the river, and they were running, climbing on rocks, and the river was flowing, and it was, the light was kind of golden, the wind was through the trees, and Duncan was talking my ear off about some video game or other. And I just love the feeling of like, I'm part of these kids' lives. They look up to me, but I also like learn so much from them. And, my day, instead of sitting in a classroom, learning something that I really struggle to, connect how it's relevant to my life, I get to be out here, like feeling the wind on my face, just like being a part of this community. And that is something that like I took so much pride in and really made me grateful for Alpine Valley.
And you're a wonderful part of the community. We're very lucky
Thank
to have you.
Thanks a lot.
Well, thanks so much. I appreciate you doing this, and good luck with your move.
Thanks. My pleasure.
Thanks to Bronwen for coming on the show and sharing her story. The show notes page for this episode is available at www.alpinevalleySchool.com/podcast/EP18. The page features articles, quotes that were mentioned in the episode, and some additional content that you might find interesting. So check it out on our website. If you want to help our podcast, if you enjoy this show and you want others to get the benefit out of it, it would really help us if you would share your favorite episodes on social media. We are available at Facebook. We're at Alpine Valley School, Instagram, Alpine Valley School there as well. And on Twitter, we are Alpine Valley SCH because we couldn't fit school in the whole name. So if you want to share your favorite podcast episode on the social media of your choosing and tag us, that would be a huge benefit to us. This is actually surprisingly a way that people find our school, and it's very helpful if you wanted to get the word out. So share your favorite episode, tag someone you think might be interested, and tag us. It really does help quite a lot. Thanks to Bruce Smith with the Clearview School, who was also a guest on this podcast fairly recently, for the idea for this podcast. Bruce was also a member of the original writing group, and he suggested we do an episode featuring storytelling as a powerful theme in the lives of young people and preparing them for adulthood. So thanks, Bruce. If you have your own ideas for the show and you want to get in touch, there are several ways that you can do so. You can contact us via email at podcast@alpinevalley.school.com. There's also a contact submission form on the show notes page. So if you visit that page, you can fill that out and submit it easily there. And we also have our podcast hotline where you can call and leave a voicemail. The number to call if you want to do that is 720-580-3384. So you can call and leave your comment or question on that line as well, and it will be featured in an upcoming episode. As always, thanks for listening. I'm Miss Gallivan. This is the Alpine Valley School podcast, and we'll be back again soon with more stories of real learning for real life.